I'm in Central.
Yep.
All right. So welcome, you guys. It's good to see you. This is
Good
like
morning.
my second LinkedIn Live in a week. So huzzah. Like that's, that's craziness. But, and to everybody who is joining us, and I know it's, we're going to probably wait a couple minutes and give people the opportunity to join and get live before we dig into it. We've got a bunch of people that signed up, and to everyone who is just sort of waiting for us to get going, I thought I'd give you a little overview of what we're going to be talking about. So we're going to be talking about understanding recruiting technology, crafting an ATS-friendly resume, interviewing strategies, navigating HR tech, and effective job search strategies. And we'll talk a little bit about the boot camp that we're all having July 25th and 26th. There's a few spots remaining, so people, if they want to do it, they should sign up for that. I first of all, thank you guys for making the time, because I know you're busy. Gina, you're writing a book. Dan, you have more projects and are managing, I'm not going to say what I was just going to say, but you're juggling a lot of things right now in a very nice way. And so thank you for making the time to be here. So I guess what I would like to start with is you guys just giving a little overview about yourself so people know who you are and why you guys are awesome. And why you're experts.
All right, I'll start. I don't know if it's why I'm awesome, but I'll just give you the quick highlights reel. My name is Gina Riley. I'm a career transition coach. Most of the people I coach are leaders and executives who are experiencing a career transition or planning a career transition, which is really the best place to be in because it can take up to a year or more at the senior levels to land the next ideal job. I've created a program, like you mentioned, Jennifer, it's called Career Velocity, and I'm actually turning that into a book. I'm working with Forbes Books, and I'm hoping to have it published next February. So that's a quick highlights reel. Yeah. So I'll hand it over to Dan.
Oh, you are so much better at being succinct than I am. Great to be back. This is my second live in 2 weeks with the two of you, which means I am elevating every time we talk. Just a true honor. So for those that don't know me and the reason I'm here, I've been in the tech industry and really been in the workforce for about 20 years. I am not only a former Amazon senior recruiter, but I was in charge of all diversity sourcing initiatives. I teach people best recruitment practices. And the skill that I have that a lot of people struggle with that I try to give others is community building and how you could really bring in inbound leads to make things better for yourself. But I'm the least interesting person here, and that's not a knock on me. That just speaks volumes about how incredible the two of you are. And I promise everybody, take a look at their profiles. I'm going to learn just as much as you are.
All right. So I am the CEO of Intry Careers, and we have built a technology platform that gets resumes through applicant tracking system software and mitigates bias and helps your resume filter through the top, getting a higher score, all of those things. I've started and sold a couple companies. I've run a couple public companies. And this is just as much a mission for me as anything else, because I think when you are feeling alone and you're feeling ghosted, it's sort of devastating, right? And so one of the things that I would like to talk about is kind of giving an overview of the AI-powered applicant tracking systems and really how they've evolved over the last few years. So as you guys know, they were really started to help guide candidates to filter to the top and help the recruiters and the hiring managers find the right people for the job. And right now what's happened is there's so many people applying to so many jobs that people are getting filtered out. They're not getting filtered in. And it's not just about keywords. Some of it is really about the technology and the platform that's being used. And if you're talking about software that's using contextual AI versus patterned AI, if it's patterned AI, then if your resume doesn't look like some of the resumes that are already in that company, you're not going to get the same score as someone who reflects the current workforce. And so we built software to combat that. And there are a couple of our competitors. I'm not going to say who they are right now, but I think the common goal is the same, is to make sure that when you submit a resume that you get a higher score and you get filtered to the top. And so there's a lot of things that you have to do to combat that when you are looking for a job. And I know Gina and Dan, you guys and I have talked about this a lot. It's not just about keywords, but keywords is a really important part of getting through the applicant tracking system software. It's also, not using a fancy resume. A fancy looking resume isn't going to get through. And for those of you who are joining, I live in a zoo, and my dogs have WWE'd into my office and are having a wrestling match right now. So my best laid plans, I'm sorry in advance that you guys can hear that. But the software and the way you have to sort of, I would say, sort of juke and jive to get your resume through is to customize your resume for every job that you're applying for. And you import the job description and you find out where the differences are between what you have on your resume and what's happening within that job description. And at last count, I think there were 400 different applicant tracking system software. And all of them are a little bit different. Some of them are homegrown, and some of them are run by really big software companies. And everyone, though, has a very similar format. One thing that we had and that we shared last week or earlier this week on our LinkedIn Live was that don't get cute with your resumes, right? Don't put a picture on it. Don't use 2 columns. Don't use fonts that the computers and the ATS systems can't recognize. Don't use different headers, right? It's a career summary, right? If you have a unique title, it won't know what to do with that. So keep your titles very traditional, because most ATS software is really traditional. And so when you think outside the box and you have a really fun, beautiful resume, that's great to bring to the interview, but it's not one that's going to get through the applicant tracking system software. Yeah.
Could I say something real quick too on that? Just with my recruiter hat on, because I'm affiliated with an executive search firm, Talents Group. Yeah. And what I would say is I can hear my counterparts, the executive search consultants, saying, we will look at every resume that comes into our database. So it is true that there are some systems that may be used to do scoring and choosing applicants based on some kind of scoring. In the executive world, we're getting paid to go to market to seek out passive candidates and accept applicants to go through. And for me, I can say there was a time that I did a COO search. I got 800 resume applicants and I read every single one of them, whether it was the traditional 6 to 8 second skim or whether it was reading it several times before I made a decision. I had to buy myself trifocals after that because my eyeballs are ready to fall out. So there's so many applicants today. The way to stand out is to really have 2 different resumes, one that you can apply with that will scan and parse, effectively. But at the executive levels, you do have to have a separate branded resume that helps you stand out with your unique value proposition. So I'll hand it back to you too.
Well, one of the things that's so great about Intry itself is that when you actually get to the site, and we'll talk about the event more later, but it comes, if you sign up for the event, it comes with 3 months of Intry. And once you populate all the information, it gives you all these different design options of different looks and different variabilities within your resume. And as somebody that's neurodiverse, I'm drawn to color. So when you do something that has a little bit more aesthetic for it, especially if that company is more design heavy, then it's really tailoring your resume, not just from a keyword perspective, but also from a design perspective to that particular company. And that's a really powerful thing. So just something to keep in mind as we go through this. I am going to turn it back over to Jennifer, but I have, for what it's worth, everybody, I've got twin daughters, 3 dogs, and a cat in the house with me. So this is, I don't want to say this is the new normal because we've been living in this normal for a while, but it's certainly normal.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I do think, Gina, what you said is really important because it's not a one size fits all situation. And applying for a job and in this market, which I think for anyone who's looking for a job right now, you're not alone. It's really hard. I think it's the hardest market that I have experienced in my professional career. And so you have to take a really different 360 approach in understanding ATS resumes, and understanding recruiting technology is just one aspect of it. There's, recruiters have technology that they use. They have CRMs where they can track candidates. And I think understanding the software that recruiters use as a candidate is worth taking a deep dive and a look into, because then you can adjust accordingly and you can pivot your messaging depending on who you're going to reach out to. So like if you're going to reach out to Korn Ferry, it makes sense to do some research to see what software they're using so you can adjust it, right? And you can pivot accordingly. And there isn't a quick fix. And I hate to be the bearer of that bad news, but what we're here to share with you is what we know and how we can help you navigate this, because it's isolating and it can be lonely and it can be frustrating. And it doesn't mean you're not smart, and it doesn't mean you're not talented, and it doesn't mean you don't have the skills to get the job. It just means that you're competing with the 500 other people who want that same job. And as more and more companies are going back to work and remote work is becoming, I think, less and less for certain companies, there's going to be more competition in the space that you live. So I think I know we need to move on to the next subject, but is there anything else that you guys want to share with the recruiting technology? And I know, Gina, like that's definitely in your wheelhouse. Anything to say before we move on?
Yeah, when it comes to recruiting technology, I would not at all call myself an expert, so much so that I've been interviewing people who work at ATS companies to inform that chapter of my book about resumes and LinkedIn profiles, because really my philosophy is the branded resume and networking is what gets your foot in the door at the executive levels, getting referrals and tapping into dormant ties, which I talk about a lot, I write about a lot. But everything that you and Dan have been saying is spot on with respect to customizing, using key terms in context, and really understanding what each opportunity the decision makers are thinking when they skim your resume that first time.
I want to jump in really quickly because there's a lot of people out there that don't actually understand the purpose of an ATS system, and there's a lot of misinformation. And I just really quickly want to dispel, because I think it sets the right tone for the rest of the conversation. As somebody that's worked within various ATSs don't reject people. That's not the purpose of it. ATS, if anybody's familiar with Salesforce or any of these other management systems, basically what an ATS is it's a database, and it allows recruiters to move candidates and store information from one place to the other. And so in my experience, and I want to use that term, in my experience, I've never seen a ATS reject a candidate. It's all about cataloging those people, and the individual recruiter is the one that's physically going in. Now, the caveat to that is I understand a lot of people hear the information about, well, recruiters only spend 7 seconds looking at your resume. I don't know the accuracy to that anymore, because that's sort of old hat thinking, and there's a lot more to it, but there's that. And the last thing I want to point out, and this is specific to LinkedIn, please don't get overly concerned when you see how many people are applying. So when you go to a site, because those numbers aren't actually accurate, those numbers categorize everybody that actually clicks on that job, not how many people actually apply. So please do not feel devalued or concerned about that. When you're going to apply, don't let it be the bridge between you saying yes or no, because unless you know exactly how it's processed, you don't know how many people actually have applied.
Right.
I'm so glad you said that, Dan. Jennifer, could I say one more thing
Oh,
too
absolutely.
on this topic? So what Dan and I were referring to was a ladder study, the ladder study done in 2018. And I think what Dan's saying is spot on, that we, there could be updated research, but it's really about eye tracking technology, like a heat map on your resume. It's really interesting if you want to Google it. It's not hard to find at all. But what I find to be true about it is that recruiters first skim the resume in an F as in Frank pattern. They're looking across the entire third of the resume where you really need to like pack it with a punch. What is your title? What's that target role you're trying to aim for? Oh, you're a chief operating officer in high tech. Oh, I'm on the right resume. I keep going. I read the summary. I'm looking for key terms and some outcomes. Then I'm going straight down the left side and I'm hitting it again, F-shaped pattern. And I'm looking at what companies did somebody work at? Was it the size of company that I want to try to recruit somebody from to take the role that I'm recruiting for now? What are the job titles? Was there some career progression? And I'm going to hit one or two of the first bullets just to see what some of those key results are. That's what we talk about for the under 10-second skim. And then when we go, this is interesting, then we go back and we read it. So it's not that recruiters skim a resume and toss it in less than 8 seconds. That's not my experience. Sometimes there's such a mismatch. I don't know about you, Dan. There's such a mismatch on a resume. I'm fascinated and I have to go back and read it and go, why did they apply?
Well,
so we're really reading them.
The last component that I want to tie in is that one of the components with that 7-8 seconds is because companies were mandating certain criteria. The thing with it is that there's a lot of people, myself included, that are looking to break down barriers of entry, whether it comes to education, whether it comes to what your experience is and otherwise. Once we remove those barriers, and it's not going to happen overnight, trust me, it's not. But once we remove some of those barriers of entry, it's going to allow a lot more personalization within the recruitment and sourcing process. And that's ultimately what we need to see to get back into a culture ad society as opposed to a culture fit. And if you want to understand the difference between that, go back and watch the last episode that I was on last week.
So I'm not to be the contrarian in the group here, but, having reverse engineered, hundreds of ATSs, there are some that do kick resumes out, right? And they kick them out with a low score. Now they may not be kicked out of the software, but they are rejected in a way that the recruiters and the hiring managers won't see them unless they go looking for them because their score or their ranking isn't high enough. So, I think when you say like rejection, that's certainly what I'm referring to, in that they don't get seen. And one thing, Dan, I don't know if you weren't on this live, but one of the things that we learned from having a couple hiring managers on is that, if they get 1,000 applicants, they can turn it off and the job posting will still look like it's live, right? So I'm not saying don't apply, but when you are looking for a job, try to be one of the first ones that is applying, right? And you can set, whether it's ZipRecruiter, Indeed, Ladder, LinkedIn, you can set alerts so that when you have a job description that meets your needs, you try to apply to it as soon as possible and try to customize your resume if you can. And I know that's difficult. And so you guys, we've sort of transitioned in from some of the recruiting technology to crafting an ATS resume. And one of the thing, I know I talked about it before, but I want people to really understand, like, don't get really cute with your resume to get through an ATS machine. Don't put a picture on it. Use traditional headers, add in the keywords. And when you're applying for a job, try to be quick about it, right? And make it a priority to find it and to apply to it. And a lot of times the hiring manager, like Kaylin would say, they turn it off at 200, then they go back if they don't find a fit, and they look at the applicants that have applied, down the road. But their thinking is that, if you didn't filter to the top 200, then you didn't get ranked high enough. And sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes if you're a director of marketing and you put marketing director in there, it's not going to read that as the same job title, right? So you're going to get a lower score, even though you're doing essentially the same job. So Gina, I want to ask you, you work with a lot of candidates and a lot of different levels. What do you think are some common resume pitfalls to avoid, other than, what some of the ones I just mentioned? Sorry if I stole some of your nuggets.
Oh, no, it's fine. I feel like actually you've been covering a lot of what we've been fleshing out, a lot of this next section that we've kind of prepared to talk about. One thing that we didn't hit, though, is if you do not attach your resume, and that is part of the requirement of the application process online, that could cause your entire application to be put by the wayside. So I've had that experience, and so that's one thing. And the other is there's knockout questions sometimes, and those knockout questions might be something like, we're hiring a marketing director, and the top out point is 225, but I want my minimum to be 250 in my salary, and I put that in there. It is possible that either the ATS or human beings have set it up to auto reject people that aren't fulfilling the requirement that they went to market for. Does that mean that company won't bend to 250? That's not what it means. It means that's what they posted, and that might be the hard line within the system. What does that mean for you as an applicant? Then you need to network to get in front of some decision makers, have a conversation about your seniority and your expertise, your unique value proposition, so that you can have a conversation and see if they're willing to go higher if you're the right candidate for them.
Yeah, interesting. Does anybody have any questions before we kind of move on? And we are going to leave time for Q&A at the end, but I just wanted to see if there were any questions before we kind of move on. So the next thing that we're going to talk about really is, okay, so when there are optional attachment features, do you recommend submitting a cover letter? Yes, I would in general always submit a cover letter, but it doesn't need to be a Bible, right?
Mm-mm.
It just short, sweet, who you are. Don't make it fancy. Definitely that. So Gina, we're gonna. Oh, go ahead.
I'd love to jump in on cover letters. So there's different ways to structure your cover letter. There's no one exact right way, but I did write an article that's in like my newsletters feature on my profile, where I crowdsourced and have 7 quotes from other resume writers and recruiters and people who are experienced career professionals, and came up with like a construct. And one of the constructs that I teach is the first short paragraph would be, why are you interested in that job? What is it about the company and the job that might not just be something you Google straight off and cut and paste over? Why is this interesting to you? How it ties to your credibility and your credentials. And then the third paragraph is just, here's when I'm available. I'm looking forward to talking with you. Again, does not have to be a Bible, but it should have some insightful nugget that makes people go, right. Oh, I get it. I want to talk to you.
Right. And being your authentic self in a cover letter, I think, is also important. Yeah. Dan, you raised your hand. Look at you.
I'm being appropriate. So real quick, and it's a bit of a non-sequitur, but if y'all notice that Jennifer's posting as this is happening without typing, that is not by accident. She has an amazing assistant that works for her named Valeska Silva that is on the back end doing so much work. I'm going to post the link to her.
Okay, some of them were me, just to be clear. But Valeska also has put something in there, and she is amazing, and she should be called out. She's dying right now.
So I just posted her link. Make sure you follow and connect with her. She is really part of the glue that keeps all this together.
It's an understatement. Okay, but anyway, all right. So I want to pivot to interviewing strategies, because I think interviewing is an art. So, you have to work really hard to even get the interview, and you don't, want things to go sideways because you haven't done enough preparation. And there is an art to interviewing. When I was in high school, probably TMI, I was in DECA. Probably no one knows what DECA is, but I went to nationals in interviewing, and I won a national award for interviewing. So it's an art. And so, Gina, what do you think are some of the best practices for preparing for interviews? Because I think like it's different, right? If you're coming out of college and maybe you're midpoint to later in your career. So what say you?
Gosh, okay, let's do one overarching thing for everyone, which is you've got to be able to tell great stories succinctly. So each story needs to be contained within a couple of minutes. And I prefer to use the construct SOAR, SOAR. What was the situation you were in? What were the obstacles you were overcoming and the challenges? What actions did you take? If you're a leader, what actions did you take and what did your team deliver on, so that you're balancing what you did and own what you did as a leader. You're also showing humility, explaining that your team delivered together some kind of product or service. And then what was the result? So that's SOAR. Other career coaches and writers will use PAR, CAR, and STAR. I can put in the comments what that means. The reason why I like SOAR is I like to hear from a leader when I'm interviewing them what the challenges were. Why are you telling me this particular story? So one is, it's not hard to pre-prepare stories. Go grab 2 or 3 ideal job descriptions, look at the bullet points on what you deliver on, reverse engineer them. AI is amazing, ChatGPT, to create behavioral oriented questions. Tell me about a time when you led a strategy and delivered on a new technology product. Now you have the starter for a SOAR. So you start building your repository of stories. Now you have a bag to pull from when you interview in a variety of situations. So the first thing is you've got to prepare your stories, and your stories are very helpful before you even start networking, because your networking contacts are going to say, well, what do you do? What do you do best? What do you want? What is your target? And if you haven't figured out your unique value proposition and you haven't gotten a few of your stories together about how you deliver something with excellence, they will have a hard time helping you. Don't make them guess. Right. That's the first thing.
One, two, I think, just to jump in there, is also be authentic. Right? Like you want to be yourself, you know, don't have robotic answers and the more authentic your answers are, you know, the more they're going to respond to you. It's going to help set you apart from everybody else.
Absolutely. So some other notes that I took, I have a massive construct that I use, the big framework with the clients that I work with. One is obviously doing research and your due diligence, and it's more than a Google search where you're just looking at the company webpage. For all of the leaders that I have worked with or ever talked to, my husband's one of them. He is in a coffee shop day after day after day, headphones on, researching 40 hours of research, because what you want to be is the most prepared person in every single room. Whether you're talking to a junior recruiter just starting in their career and they're 25 years old, I've been that person. There's certain things that that early career person is listening for. It might be the basic things on the resume and listening for your career transitions and any issues that there could be. If you're talking all the way up to an executive search consultant, they're going to listen for other kinds of things, particularly your behavioral and leadership skills. Hiring managers are going to have another lens. Peers of yours on a hiring team are going to care about something else. So you need to research the people that you're interviewing with, make some guesses and assumptions about what they care most about, and you need to be prepared with your stories for every eventuality. Some of the other things you should ask yourself: why is the job open in the first place? What solution will you provide with whatever problem it is that they're 100%. Trying to solve?
And that's people are asking that more and more, to be like, okay, so what would you do in this situation? And if you don't know, then they're like, but do you have any experience? So, I mean, I think that's really solid. That's really solid advice. When we're done with this, I also want to hear each one of yours, like maybe your worst or your most interesting interview question. I have mine prepared. So, but continue with the interview prep.
Okay, what else would I, so another thing is looking at the company mission and purpose and seeing what the total purpose is. Who are they serving? Who are the customers? You know, what's the customer base like? Who are the competitors? what does that company say that they value, and can you see that those values are being expressed? Because we know that if we have a values misalignment with a company, that's the number one cause of job dissatisfaction, is a values violation. So understanding yourself first, again, is super important. Other things for especially the senior leaders going into these interviews, you got to know the financials, read about the quarterly reports, listen to any recordings, from the executive team or the board of directors. Look and see if they're making investments. Are they making divestitures? Why? Because we need to figure out, what problem am I going to solve for them if I join this team? So that's kind of a quick highlights reel. It's pretty intense. If you want to swing for the fences for a leadership level role, you've got to put in about 40 hours of work.
And one thing, I totally agree with what you just said. And Randy just made a comment that at least 60% of hiring decisions are based on how much they like you, right? So that's, with the recruiter and with, hiring managers. And I think that also depends on the size of the company. And as what did Marcel say? I feel in this market now is who they know, and they hire that person. I mean, I definitely think that's part of it. But for me, as someone who's hired thousands of people over the course of my career, one of the things that is important to me when I interview people is, how comfortable are you? Like, I know you're going to be nervous, right? But what's your comfort level? And if I start asking you really granular questions about, just say if you're a developer, like if I start asking you questions about, if you do front end development, what does that look like? Because I want to know that you have the capabilities of doing that. Or if you are, a marketing manager, I want to understand how you are understanding the digital landscape and how all of those things are shifting in this market, right? Anyway, so enough about my comments. Dan, I want to pivot to you and say, what are some techniques for people who are going to answer some tough interview questions? Because some questions you just go, how did you just answer that question? Wow.
Well,
but you got to answer it.
I posted a couple links in the chat, and I think before I touch on that, I have to make the statement, it wouldn't be me if I didn't, that if you need a reasonable accommodation to feel more comfortable within an interview process, the ADA, Americans with Disability Act, does allow for a lot of flexibility unless it causes undue hardship to the company. And so I provided that information, and it includes, there's an additional section, because I'm very big on women's rights, that is about Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. And that's something really important to please keep in mind, because we need to be better to the women in the economy. So the reason I bring that up is because not everybody's going to be comfortable with answering tough questions. And I don't believe that body language is a precursor or something that should be considered within the framework of the difficulty. So, but when you are answering tough questions, and this is going to be a little bit harsh, the way that I look at it is, if you've done the preparation, then even the hard questions you're going to be able to figure out an answer to. So, for
100%.
instance, if you're in high tech and you're going through the process and you've put that 40 hours of work in, you've done the interview prep, you've done the research on the company, you sort of have an idea of where their idiosyncrasies are, what their strengths, what their weaknesses, and you've talked to enough people, then when something comes up, not only are you going to have enough stories and examples to answer it, but you're going to be able to shift it. Now, the problem is, a lot of people look at it like they have to have a situation that results in success, when most companies actually, I don't want to say they don't care about that, but they want to look and see what you've learned from the situation, what alternatives, what jumping off points. So if you're in a situation where you had to choose between two things and you made the wrong choice, why did you make the wrong choice? What would you do differently in the future? And that shows how much you're capable of adapting, learning, and also being coached. And whether you're at the entry level, mid-career, or senior level, all of that, there's a level of humility that comes with it. And if they know that you could work with them and they could work, if you could work with them and vice versa, then that's going to present a lot better situation than trying to force feed an answer that doesn't have legs to it. Mm-hmm. So to sort of circle the entire thing, be as prepared as you can, know your stuff, know that you are going to make mistakes. Again, like Jennifer said, that's fine. We do live all the time, and you may have filler words, you may have stutters. Don't worry about that. Nobody else does. Do your best, and worst case scenario, you learn for next time. There's a lot of people that have been trying to get in companies time and time again, and they'll tell you, I didn't get in my first, second, third time, but the fourth time I figured it out, and now I've been there for 5 years.
Right. I mean, I think there's a lot of grit and determination in this process. And, there's smaller companies and larger companies and medium-sized companies are going to have different metrics on the kind of questions that they interview. And I think, answering the tough questions is, in this competitive landscape, right? When you have 10 people that are qualified for the same job, there's going to be things where people are going to dial it down and they're going to be splitting hairs, right? About, like, I love this person. What about this? And I think you have to be prepared to deal with that. I mean, there's one question in my previous career that someone asked me, and I was like, it was pretty offensive, and it was for a big role, and I was like, that's, I'm really curious why you asked me that question. Right. So I didn't get angry. I didn't get defensive. I was just like, I'm curious why you asked me that question, because that tells me more about the person asking the question than maybe my answer. And I think, when you are a recruiter and a hiring manager, you talk to so many different people and you have to get creative in your questioning, because otherwise you can get bored if you're interviewing, 15 different people a day. The most interesting interview question I was ever asked was, what letter of the alphabet would you compare yourself to? And I was like, that's a really interesting question. And so I said the E. And they said, well, why E? And I said, well, because, it's got a strong, connection, and, it allows for different branches of creativity and determination and, I don't know, problem solving. And they're like, oh, that's a really interesting answer. And I was like, that's a really weird question. And, I think sometimes you have to be prepared to answer those. So what else do you guys have to say before we move on? And I know we've only got like 20 minutes left, and we're still going to talk about navigating HR technology, but I think we talked a lot of about that. What else do you guys have to say on interviewing, or any interesting interview questions that you think are good ones or bad ones that you faced in your careers?
Dan, do you want to take it?
So there's no specific interview question that's ever stood out that like came to mind that was like, oh, that's really interesting. What I could say is the best candidate I've ever worked with came from the private sector in education and moved over to technology. And the reason they were so great, and I'm bringing this up because I want people to understand that transferable skills are real. And when you do well and you prepare, you can succeed even in a different market. She wasn't able to share a lot of the things that she had done in the private sector, but she did the research and she understood how she could scale the experience that she had to the company that she was applying to. And the result was, not only did she get the job with flying colors, there was consideration for skipping a step and putting her in a higher role, even though it was a completely different industry and segment. So again, these things are possible if you do the research, you pay attention, and you work within the means that you have, because it's really hard for an average job seeker. But now you don't get to share examples because you're in this private sector. That's even more challenging. So to see that was the most impressive thing I've ever seen. And her name, by the way, if you want to look her up, is Dahlia Gafir.
Oh, just her. That's amazing. No, I mean, I think you bring up something that's really important. Like when COVID happened and everyone, like restaurants closed and hotels closed and people were, how do you transfer your skills from one level to somewhere else. And I think, in your, I mean, you had a great example, but if you, maybe you're not an executive, right? Maybe you are coming into the market and you're in the service industry, you're doing something else. Like, all of those skills transfer, and they have different names. It's like people who are coming from the military and they want to, assimilate and get back into, a civilian role. They have phenomenal experience, but the terms and the vernacular is completely different. So, taking those experiences that you've used in the military and to transfer them into the private sector, I think is a really great example of transferable skills that people sometimes forget about. And everyone has value, and everybody brings something to the table. It's how you communicate the value that you bring and how you contribute it.
Really quick on the military front, I'm going to be a little bit controversial right now. I don't believe that recruiters do a well enough job at understanding the steps associated with military in order to put them in the right positions. I know this is sort of a non sequitur, but good recruiters will take the time and understand what that means, where those steps are, so that they could position them in the right roles. Because yes, there's military components of organizations, but we need to be more inclusive of our military and our military families. Sorry.
Don't be sorry. I 100% agree. I think a lot of times how ex-military are treated is rather egregious. So I am totally on board with that. And my dad was in the Air Force, so I have personal connections to that. So that being said, so when we're talking about navigating HR technology, insights in some of the latest HR, tech trends and tools, and how to stay ahead of HR tech barriers are some of the things that we were going to talk about next. But I feel like we sort of already commented on those. So I'm not sure that we really need to go back. And if anybody else has any questions that they want to ask about those, like, we can certainly circle back during the Q&A. But I think right now, what's really important is, what are effective job search strategies? Strategies for making meaningful connections and tips for positioning yourself as a top candidate. So, Gina, why don't we start with you on that? Okay. And then Dan, and then I'll add any comments to the end or put myself on mute. I don't know, whatever there's more value in.
So my first question is, how much time do you have?
All right. 10 minutes for this.
Kidding aside. Okay. Effective job search strategies. There's so many, so I'm not going to cover every single one in just a couple of minutes. The first thing that I recommend is to create a target list of companies so that you can at least have focus. If you're unfocused, you're going to run out of steam and you're going to kind of come unraveled. So I use, like I mentioned in the last live I was on with you, Jennifer, I like Steve Dalton's The 2-Hour Job Search, because he provides a very specific method of building that list of 40 and focusing on the top 5. Now, let's jump into like beyond that, and how do we make meaningful conversations? For me in general, it's working in advance of needing the job in the first place. And so that might be throughout my career, I'm attending conferences, making meaningful connections with other professionals and like-minded people, making sure I'm first degree connected with those kinds of people. And the other thing is spending time on LinkedIn, even if it's 15 minutes a day, because a lot of people haven't made it a habit to be on LinkedIn, but it's our best professional networking platform. And so coming onto LinkedIn and training the algorithm of the things that you want to see that are in industry or functionally related to your area of expertise, making meaningful comments on other people's posts, and eventually shifting into thought leadership for your own self, sharing articles and creating a water cooler of conversation around yourself, even if you don't have all the information about a particular topic. When you engage with people meaningfully throughout your career, part of the best job and networking strategy is to then tap into those relationships at the point you need them, because you've been nurturing them all along. and it feels natural, and people are willing to take that phone call when you want a listening ear, or when you need to do an informational conversation, or you need an introduction. So that's just the highlights reel. I love conferences. I like spending time on LinkedIn. I like the idea of doing a thought leadership strategy. And above all else, your top strategy should be always leading with curiosity and questions, so that you can learn about what's happening in your ecosystem, and then you're tying your pre-planned unique value proposition and your interview stories to apply that in the right settings. Dan, do you have something?
One of the benefits of being on stage with you is I know that I don't always need to talk because you're so good at what you do.
Thank you.
And getting me short of words to anybody that knows me is not the easiest thing. So bravo. My wife could use your advice. You know, there's a couple of touch points I'll mention. Among them is to be original. You touched on the thought leadership piece, but a lot of times when people post or comment, there's this comment for better reach thing, and they do a lot of repetitive information that doesn't showcase their original thought. And the reality is that's not going to generate long-term sustained social preference. It's not going to raise your level of esteem within the community. And the reality is people seek out those that have that original thought. So if you can find something that is new for others and you could showcase how you're an expert in that, then that's going to make it so much more beneficial. I'll use a personal example. And I got to get better, because like my first inclination is to say not to pat myself on the back, but yeah, it's patting myself on the back. When I first got started on LinkedIn, there was nobody connecting job seekers to recruiters in posts. And I did that and generated 100,000 views and 1,000 comments every week. It turned into a 1,000-person community. I stopped after 2 years because it was just excessive. But the point being was that because I was doing something new that really, I don't want to say hadn't been done before, because I don't want to use an absolute, people were drawn to me. I was getting 1,000 connection requests per week. I was winning awards. I was being asked to sponsor products and different things. And it was all because of that original thought. Now, most people have a tough time figuring out, well, what is my original voice? And that's where people like Gina, people like Kaylin, people like Marissa, people like Jennifer and Lisa, and I know I'm not giving everybody last names, but my brain is going crazy. This is where it comes into play. This is a component of why we're putting on this boot camp, so you can meet people that can help you gain these original thoughts and figure things out for yourself. So that's going to be my message today. I'm going to keep it really focused and say be original, and originality wins out over repetition every day of the week.
I mean, I think that is really, really true. And also be original, try to be original in your cover letters, try to be original in your, in your comments, try to be original in the things that you say and do, because that sets you apart. It really, really does. That's, mic drop. Dan, take a quick look at the comments, because, there is, Joel wanted to see if any of us had unique suggestions for job search strategies for neurodivergent.
Yeah, so there's a couple things, and I just posted. I actually saw what you were talking about. There's very few communities that actually that are job search platforms that support neurodiverse. I tagged Miles Wallace, who works for Peak Performers, and that's one of the very few companies that I know of that's ADHD and neurodiversity positive, and helping those in the community find something. The reality is that we're still at the very, 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 very early segment of the push for more disability awareness. I'm one of the few people I know that when I'm filling an application, I say that, yes, I am disabled. So because we're so early on in the movement, there's not going to be a whole bunch of strategies that are isolated and focused. I think it comes down to, how do you shift the narrative so that you're working within your superpowers? For me, I need to be doing 16 things at once. So if I have, I have 17 different kinds of fidget spinners, I may be playing, or maybe I have to segment it and do 20 minutes at a time. Maybe I have to, whatever the case may be, but you need to really form fit for yourself. And then if you really want to take it to the next level, most companies do have ADA compliance, and they have opportunities to gain special accommodations. There's some cautionary measures I'm going to share with you. One is they're not going to advertise it, so you're going to have to look at their pages, sometimes all the way at the bottom. The second thing is, even though recruiters are not supposed to be allowed to know what your accommodation is, because you're going to be working with a third party at the company, by virtue of having accommodations made for you, there still is going to be an awareness that you are somebody that needs accommodations. So there is still inherent bias with it. It's all a matter of how comfortable do you feel pushing for yourself. I got to a point where I was like, I'm interviewing, I'm code switching, and then I'm getting in, and the companies are wondering, well, who is this person? They're not the same person I interviewed. I got so tired of that that I said during the interview process, look, I'm just going to be me, and I'm going to let them know. And if I don't get chosen for that particular job, that's not a company I want to work for. And the final point that I'm going to end on with this is, from somebody that spent the majority of their life job hopping, when I made the decision to acknowledge my superpowers and stop calling them disabilities, when I decided to advocate for myself, the amount of growth I had, the amount of alleviation of the stress and the anxiety and the resentment that I had towards the outside world very much dissipated. And I became the best version of myself. And that's what companies want now. So please have confidence in yourself. You do have those superpowers. You notice I'm using superpowers as opposed to disabilities. It's all frame of mind. See Gina if you want to shift the way that you think.
Okay, so I have just a couple of things to add on to that. So I typically don't say, hey, I'm someone who has ADD, right? And I personally, which I do, by the way, was diagnosed, later in my life, and it answered a lot of questions for me. And for me, it's my superpower. I feel no shame about it. I don't feel like I need to hide it. And it's like, this is me, love me or leave me, play me or trade me. And I'm really good at what I do. I understand a lot of different things, and I think that being upfront about things is important. I typically don't like, if I were applying for a job, I don't know that I would say that I had a disability, only because I reverse engineered so many different ATS systems, and I think that's a way that people can filter you out as one of their knockout questions. Is it legal? No. Does it happen? Yes. It just is what it is. It's not fair. It's not ethical, but it's out there. And so, it's, for me, again, I wear it as a badge of honor. Before I figured it out, I was like a hummingbird. I was a really effective hummingbird, but I was a hummingbird. And there's some people that don't understand how to deal with that. And I sort of found my fit, in the world with it. And again, it's my superpower. And there are things that I see and do that other people can't, because my brain works differently than other people's brain does. And it doesn't make it worse or better. It's simply different. And I love different, in all things. So I think that we've only got a few minutes left. I want to just make sure if anyone has any questions before we kind of wrap up. And for all of you guys who are attending, really appreciate it. We know you have a lot of things that you can do with your time, and know that, we're doing this because this is really where our hearts are. We come at it from different angles, and yes, it is all of our businesses, but we do it because we're passionate about it. and taking time and hours out of our day to do this is because we care, and because we've all been there. That being said, I think Valeska did actually put this in there for me, because that's too much to type and I wouldn't have been able to, engage. But, like, if you guys are interested in the really comprehensive boot camp that we've all put together, it's a 360, right? It's a banner, it's an optimized resume, it's an optimized LinkedIn, it is a strategy, it's creating your unique value proposition, it's creating plans, a job strategy, a searching strategy, a messaging strategy. How do you do drip campaigns? Putting together a plan to deal with your mental health when you're looking for a job, because it's stressful. And anyone who doesn't think it's stressful, like, I really want to meet them and understand their strategy, right? Because that's awesome. I think, this is a really difficult job market, but it's persistence, and it's a numbers game. And when I say it's a numbers game, it's, the more you apply to jobs that you're qualified for, please do not spray and pray. Please don't do that. That is a terrible strategy. And, this is like, you are your best advocate. And I would encourage everyone to find a mentor or have somebody that they can talk to when they're going through this. And one thing I wanted to add when you guys were talking about interviewing was, I think role playing when you're interviewing is so smart. Calling up a friend or a colleague and being like, hey, can I just take 15 minutes and can we just role play this and give me some feedback on what you think I did well and what you think I did poorly? Because I don't care what your level is, there can be a certain amount of complacency in how you're interviewing. And I certainly have found that in my career where, maybe I got a little bit cocky, maybe I got a little bit lazy, and to go through that, I got feedback and I was like, oh, that's not what I thought you were going to say. I thought you were going to say I did a rock star job. And they were like, well, you did a good job, but here's, like, where maybe you didn't do so well. And that was really helpful for me. What about you guys? Any last thoughts?
Dan?
I defer to you first this time.
Oh, goodness. Okay. Last thoughts. So you mentioned the boot camp, Jennifer, and what I would say to people is, like, all through the pandemic and even after, there's been a lot of opportunities for people to jump on lives or do 1 hour, free workshops and whatnot. The boot camp is really, we have 10 or 12 professionals coming together with different layers of expertise to come together and do actual mini, workshops within the workshop to help people get where they need to go. So it's, we're doing things with you. There's pre-work. It's real work. None of this is easy. And so this is a chance to have people like, Dan and these other counterparts all invested 2 solid days to take, a small cohort through, I think, a great experience.
I mean, it's intimate.
It's intimate. And to have 12, oh my gosh, if I was in a career transition, I have 12 different heads on my process. That'd be amazing. Anyway, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I look back to where I was 6 years ago. I had a new powering of twins, experiencing postpartum depression and burnout, and having to figure things out on my own. And the reason Jennifer is one of my best friends, the reason that this is so impactful to me is because I didn't have the opportunity to have a collective of people that would really be a built-in support system, because 2 straight days, it seems like a short period of time, but it builds a bond. And when you get to be in that intimate space with people, that reaction doesn't allow for there to just be, hey, I'm here and then I'm gone.
Mm-hmm.
There's that continued dialogue that goes on and on, regardless of what the situation happens. And look, I'm the first one to admit, I understand that money is tight, but at the same point, the benefits that you're getting out of it are so extraordinary that this is going to elevate you, not just for your job search, but this is going to elevate you when you're in that job and for a long time beyond. It's just, I get emotional talking about, because I know the quality of people that are involved, and it's just a special thing that Jennifer's putting on here. And I know she looks tough, but this is a heart-centered this is a heart-centered thing. She, and she is tough. I'll give her credit, but there's a heart there. There's a big teddy bear right there. So we got to give her some credit. And I know she's cringing inside. Beyond that hair is a really soft, sweet person.
Okay, I had a bad hair day a couple weeks ago, and it's continuing to live for another day.
It's the human behind the, it's all good. That's a great note to end on. Thanks, Dan. I love it.
Guys. Well, listen, it's, this, and I'm not doing this boot camp by myself, just to be clear. Like, I may be the facilitator of it and the thinking it up, but this is like a team effort, and everyone who's part of it is really exceptional. So I am really humbled to be working with them on this project. So, so Randy had some technical issues, so he's not with us, but he is on the panel. And Jennifer really cares here. Thank you. I do sincerely care. So, well, listen, everybody, really appreciate you showing up, and it was great to spend time with you guys. And thanks, Andrew. And hopefully we'll see you soon, and maybe in the boot camp or on our next LinkedIn Live. Have a great rest of the day, everybody.
Happy Friday.